This episode is brought to you by
Co-creation.
Welcome to Leadership Actually. It's not love, it's leadership. Welcome, Lisa Powney.
Welcome, Lee Rogers. How the devil are you?
I'm good. My bottom is healing well. My hands are slightly numb still, if I'm honest, but they're getting there. But I've had a sports massage for the first time in my life, which was epic. And I just say a huge thank you to the Physio Lounge that donated that.
Nice. I'd like one as well if you're listening. I haven't done any sport, but still. Love a massage. Definitely. And I've noticed that we kind of merge both into our backgrounds here. Like I'm very green, looking very green, and you look very creamy white. So yeah, we've matched our backgrounds.
That's how we started in Series 1 with uniforms and all sorts.
And your glasses match your, Man United. So this is good. Yeah, very much. I'm going for nature. This is a nature view. Definitely. Like it. But I've had a fun morning. It's been sports day, that time of year where we do the tradition. Yeah, I was reflecting while there, like how many years has that must have been going on since the dawn of schools, like, the sports day, and in the same format, with different races. But yeah, it's always really good fun, isn't it? So I absolutely enjoy that and feel very glad and blessed that we can go and watch it actually. So yeah,
I must admit, I said, because Ella had hers 2 weeks ago, I think it was, and I went, it's only at sports day that you would ever use this skill or like put those rings on your head. It's the only time you will ever do that in your life, isn't it? In primary sports day.
Totally, egg and spoon, those kind of things. Absolutely. And then Freddie's just had his cast off not long ago, and so they said they could do them, but to be careful. And literally, first race he won, but like at the end he just tripped over and did like a spin. I was like, oh my gosh. straight off, just like his mother. Not the winning bit, but definitely the falling over. So
talking about falling over, this is the messy class. So I did complete Land's End to John O'Groats 1,000 miles.
You did.
I did also crash after 50 minutes.
You did. Lee.
Into it.
How did that happen?
How?
Yeah.
Well, there was a lady that decided to take a dog across the whole of the path in Penzance, and my brother-in-law had these dead funky brakes that made him stop really quickly, even in the rain. And on my bike, the 15-year-old bike, didn't quite have the same tools to be able to slow as quickly. So I crashed into him. His back wheel was worth more than my whole bike put together. I broke one of his spokes. I fell off the bike. I hit a bench and wrecked all my arm and bruised it. And I had a buckled wheel all within 50 minutes.
Wow. That is some messy class, Lee. That is some messy class. You do it amazingly well.
But we did complete 1,000 miles in 2 weeks and raised
absolutely amazing
nearly £9,000 for charity. So
wow,
worth it.
Epic. Congratulations. That is absolutely huge. And actually, acknowledging that the last time we were on our podcast, you were about to go, so you've come through the other side, so that is absolutely fantastic. Well done, Lee. I'm so proud of you. Even if you fell off your bike, you got back on. This is what it's about. Learned some lessons along the way, I am sure.
Tons of leadership lessons, actually. But it does, it does fit nicely within our first guest of the series. So this is series 4 review. And way back when we interviewed 3-time gold medalist Ed Clancy.
Oh my gosh, yeah, this really does fit with that. And now you're in the same kind of vein, you're in the same lane now as Ed Clancy, aren't you? So,
No one's ever said that. No one will ever say that other than Lisa Powney. So thank you so much.
you're very
I'm
welcome.
not quite sure as a non-cyclist or international athlete, whichever you sort of tell yourself at the time, how true that actually is. But what was your recollections of, I guess, some of the things that Ed had to say, and anything that challenged what you already knew?
Nice. I think for me, Ed was one of the most decorated gold medalists or medalists, in his sport. And I was very much in awe that he came to speak to us about it, but really humble and actually talked about the real realities of what he had to give up to be able to succeed in that way. So a lot of life he had to put aside to be able to do that. And would that happen? Would he do that again? You'd have to think about it, which really, challenged my thinking. You always believe, that people believe it was worth all the effort, but it does take an incredible amount of effort. And that from your big epic journey, that's one journey, what that took. But he talked about, it doesn't remove self-doubt. He still doubted that sometimes, in terms of, what he had to do and had to really work in terms of his performance. He still questioned himself. And actually, when you were talking about your ride, there were times when you still questioned yourself, and that, you had to use your faith to go, I can do this and I can make it happen. But it didn't mean that that doubt wasn't there, wasn't it?
Absolutely right. Completely. And I guess just to add on to what you've said about Ed, and it really struck me that when he said, he would really have to question whether he'd do the same again in his career for what he gave up. So I think, and if I relate to my ride for a second, that was a 2-week process. It wasn't, because it was like, probably 5 months of training and then a 2-week of performance. But Ed talked very much about a 4-year cycle. So, and we say that as though it's, as a watcher of a sport, as a really simple thing, but this is at the highest intensity to train for 4 years, to then have one chance to perform on one day or in one moment. And that's the enormity. That is what makes the Olympics for me. Also, I think very much around, he talked very much about it requires a team. So in order to progress, I was quite struck, and it really re-emphasized for me. No, not really. It challenged my thinking, going, how do you progress to the next level, but then recognize when actually what you've tried or to innovate has gone wrong? And the fact you absolutely then need the team around you, the whole team, whatever that looks like, in order for the performer that gets all the glory and all the accolade. And very much, in our leadership world, we don't often talk about coaching, for example, or support for leaders, when actually the very best in what we've heard on this podcast always have that support mechanism in place that's right for them in the right time for them. And that's what really struck me with what Ed said, and it challenged me around, and still that nagging thought of, why do we not do it in business as much or as readily and see the value in it, whereas in the sports world that are looking for that absolute highest performance, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Like, why don't we put that focus on the team, and that everybody has their accountability, responsibility, and role to play, and how much more we could do when we bring that together. And I think the best business leaders do that, which is going to segue into our next guest, which was a business leader that really did talk about team. He constantly said around it, well, it was his job to bring out the best in others, and he really recognised his team. So that was Steve Warburton, who had real belief in what he did and also in his team and the people that he brought along with him. What was your impact from Steve's conversation?
The thing that challenged me the most, and I still wrestle with this today, even from my own experiences, is it's that balance and that tipping point between being vulnerable and not knowing enough or being the smartest person in the room, to then, well, how do you have that and then really inspire people to take up their own mantle and know what they're about, to then perform and be with your peers in like an exec and feel like you've got all the knowledge and know what's going on, you got the heartbeat, where actually there's the same vulnerabilities, there's the same not knowing, there's the need for support at that level. It must be a really, like, that is the challenge, isn't it? To go, how can you be authentically yourself and be vulnerable with your peers and be seen to be a strength and confident?
And how did you reconcile that? How do you reconcile that? What do you think from the conversation you took?
Yeah, I think that was Steve. You know, he very much talked about not needing to know everything, and he freed himself up from that. And he talked about trust. You know, trusting the team, trusting himself. Again, it's never just about him. Actually, you know, so knowing his people. He's been there consistently for a long time. There's elements of that. It's understanding the heartbeat of the organisation.
Absolutely.
And the culture that's created.
Totally. A quick messy moment. My earphones just dropped out. Won't be set. There we go. I'll be back in any second now. I don't even know if you can hear this. Okay. Right. I'm back in.
So this is the point that some podcasts would edit that bit out. We'll just keep it in and hope that people accept us for who we are. Authentic.
That's right. I think that's the balance, really, isn't it? Credibility and authenticity right there in that moment.
I love the fact you've got AirPods in, though. Cool.
I know. Cool. Do you know what? Our next guest, I don't think you can get anyone more authentically themselves. Who a spade's a spade. They bring everything of themselves to their work and to their messages, and there is nothing in there that's, you know, leaves to be, you know, not looked at. Actually, he's a fantastic guy, which was Dave Scholes, and we talked about this. We've both been on his workshops through Six Connections and learned some great tools. Some of them we might have seen before, actually, but seen it in a different frame and actually in a more kindness frame, I think. And really talked about what is resilience and the ability just to have, I think the most difficult thing for many people is just to have a conversation. So, and to have some connections around you and to be able to say, are you okay? And it came from a very authentic place. So Dave set up Six Connections because his friend committed suicide and he wanted to make a difference. And his ethos is he really wants to change the world. You know, he wants to have that real impact and as many people as possible to feel like they're equipped to talk to people when they're not okay and actually, you know, be there and be that listening voice. And so I feel very proud that we've been able to be part of that and, you know, carry on that word, and recently been part of his amazing fundraiser as well. So, but Dave was really great on the podcast as well. So, you know, spoke really authentically about, you know, the conversations and what he's trying to do. What did you take from that, Lee? I know that he has a special place in your heart too.
Yeah, he does, absolutely. You know, he talks about 3-stripe, find your 3-stripe. You know, he's connected with an audience via music. You know, and what a brilliant way. And I guess what really challenged me, not just on the podcast, but in some of the work off screen that we've done with him, is his ability to just open up and make everyone engaged. I found him really inclusive. And not just by words, but through action, actually. And Dave is ultimately challenging, and it's challenged me a lot. I've thought about this a lot. Dave's challenged the convention around being proactive about mental health support. And that's something that's impacted my world and family significantly. And I think the more that we can do that in a really just open, fun way, you know, and he's got an organisation powered by mates or a campaign powered by mates. It's brilliant because actually that's what a lot of people need. You know, I've already put those actions into play, and Dave lives and breathes it. and I think the best leaders, they just do. It reminds me as Penny Ferguson when she said, I'm not just thinking about leadership because we're having this conversation. I live and breathe this. The fact that she'd travelled 4 hours to come and be with us on the most horrendous weather day, it would have been the easiest thing in the world to cancel. The very best leaders do it. Their actions, they're not words.
Absolutely. And he does, he just shows up, doesn't he? So absolutely love Dave. So he was an absolutely fantastic guest. And who was next on our list, Lee, for you?
Yeah, we then had Dan Armitage, that was just a revelation. Talking about neurodiversity. And what I loved about Dan is, he wasn't preaching to you about what's right or what's wrong. He was opening up the conversation. Again, similar to Dave, but very much about opening up the conversation. And I think the challenge there is whenever we talk or think about these things, it's fine to do it on a one-off day or a one-off campaign, but we know from a leadership perspective, consistency is key. So how we educate ourselves and re-educate ourselves and because things change and move and evolve. That was a message I took, actually, that this is not just a static thing. It's about being curious and open constantly to what's next. It's not about having the perfect right answer right now, because that in 3, 6, 9 months will have evolved into not being the right answer or something different.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I guess Dan as well embodied like the bringing your whole story, this kind of authenticity, but he has lived and breathed, what he talks about now. So neurodiversity, he's diagnosed with ADHD, and he works with lots of people in the neurodiversity space and comes from a part of passion that says, how do we make this feel safe for people? How do we get people to be more curious, as you said, rather than, put people in boxes or not allow them to bring their best selves to work? That's what it's about. He runs an access to work program and lots of training programs, so to bring that awareness to work, but also to help people identify, where they may be struggling and how everybody can help in that space and make it okay. Again, it's like make it okay to bring your diversity to work and, and thrive and be the best of that. And having been part of that, I've been part of some assessments and I've seen some of his coaching, and it's really safe. He creates a really safe environment for you to explore and look at, what may enhance everybody's experience at work. So I love the power of his story, and he's very willing to answer any questions, and be really open about that. And I think that connects people as well. If you're willing to talk about your lived experience, it brings people together. So yeah, Dan was an absolute great guest too.
Yeah, and I just again just sort of add into that for me, just because it sort of sparked some thoughts as you were talking. This is, how do we, the challenge is how to relate almost Dan's message and word to a chief people officer, but how do we do it to a chief financial officer? Because for me, this is about unlocking performance in talent.
Yeah.
So that people, it's not just a tick in a box to do the right thing from a corporate or from an organization point of view. This is genuinely about how do you create a pathway for people to succeed. And if
Absolutely.
you do that, then the individuals obviously benefit, but also organizations benefit from a diversity, not of thought and of action and of worth. So that's where you get competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about a tick in a box and a nice thing. And if it's ever, like the stat of autistic people, I seem to remember from my training was like only 16% of autistic people are full-time employed. That tells me that not enough is being done to create an environment where people with autism can really thrive on a more consistent basis. It's actually down to organizations to unlock that for people, as opposed to it just being a terrible stat of then not utilizing the talent pool overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And something really, talking about performance shifted, I was talking to a friend's son, and one of the first things he was talking about, he's only young, he's only 8 or 9, and he was talking about he had ADD, I think he was talking about, and that kind of was a big part of the conversation. And I was able to, thinking about Dan's work, talk about what's your superpowers. And he just lit up. He had this amazing list of superpowers when he kept talking. And what else can you do? He said, I'm really creative and my imagination's massive and I can, and I bring lots of fun and loads of stuff. And the energy shifted in our conversation. And actually, we didn't talk about some of the stuff that he might struggle with. It was just a whole conversation. There was other kids there, and they started talking about their superpowers. So it's a really lovely way to frame it and get people in a place where they see that and they thrive. So learned a lot from Dan, definitely. And part of learning a lot is, and we've talked about it before, is kind of belief. And our next guest has written a book that is called Belief. And he talks a lot about leadership being lived, not just spoken about. And he has really been there. So he's a variety of roles. I guess his big part of his book and his story is about buying a football club. And the worst football club, I think it was, and taking that to a better place and talking about that values only matter when they're visible. He talked about the culture was massively important, and we love talking about culture and how that comes out as everyday behaviours. And how that people would be watching him as a leader. I love that moment when the leader was sacked and he was brought in. He was part of the team and he was brought in and he was the new leader. And like from that second, they looked at him like, well, come on then, what are you gonna do now? So as soon as you get that title, then people look to you, and he had to make some really core decisions in that space. So a great story. It comes across brilliantly, really engaging. I really loved that conversation with Spencer. What about you?
Yeah, so there you go. That's the book.
Belief, yeah.
Talking about. He stopped me in my tracks and it challenged me, right? Because I would consider myself to be quite an empathetic person. Now, the thought, I tried to go into his shoes around, you've just bought a football club and every single day you get hammered.
Yeah.
Right, so you've put your own money, you're giving your life up, you're travelling all over the country, you're not seeing your family for a football club and a community, and you're not always getting the return that you would imagine would be invested in that. And it's as someone who's followed football all my life, it's the first time I've really sat down and thought about it on a level that's going, what does it actually take on the other side of the seat? Because as a football fan, and I support United, it's a big global corporation. You as a fan, you expect. You just expect everything to work, and when it doesn't, you can bemoan it. And not once have I thought about it, like the Glazers, for example. I've moaned about the Glazers to the nth degree, been on radio, I still got that view. But not once have I thought about them as a person, them as an individual.
Yeah.
I haven't. I've just gone, this is a situation, this is my take on this in the world. Now, when Spencer spoke to us, I was like, my gosh, this has really challenged me from the empathy, from the human side of it and perspective for a minute, and gone, he's lived and breathed it. But what it absolutely did is when you talked about, I'm sorry to keep going on about my ride, but it's been relevant for me. You talked about my faith. I had the belief and the faith that I would finish. That was it. It was strong enough. It was big enough. And, I'm only part way through the book, but I get the sense from Spencer that that's what he had to have had. And despite all the noise and all the protests, it's that inner belief that you can then go and succeed and improve the situation from when you've picked it up. And I know lots of sports teams that have kind of said that, leave the shirt in a better place than when you picked it up. But this was a real life example where you're giving yourself the biggest possible challenge.
Absolutely.
So he's
brilliant.
He's lived and breathed it. The other thing he said really quick was, like, quit while you're ahead ultimately. Don't let things go on too long. Don't bury your head in the sand. And the challenge there is like, how do you get the right timing of things, whether it's a product that might not be doing as well, whether it's a relationship, a commercial relationship, a work relationship, where's the balance? And I think it re-challenged me to think about, well, what's my decision-making tree, or what should be people's decision-making tree in that process? Like, what has to be right for it to be a good decision to exit?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be a really hard decision as well, especially when you put all your passion, your time and your energy and effort. When is enough, and it's time to go is a massive decision. And I think we talk about a lot when we're in our coaching sessions, with leaders. That often comes up. Once we've been through a few sessions, it gets to that point where it says, "Is this the time?" That you have to make that decision, and it's massive, isn't it? So yeah, absolutely love Spencer in that space. And then we had an amazing whirlwind of a guest who really did challenge a lot of our thinking. Leisha McCann, from Sky News, and now doing her own communication business. For me, I guess the thing I've told most people is her ability in communication. When she talked about the story of, she would have to come on and she would have like 2 minutes as a reporter, and she could read words in time. So she could take a piece of, a paragraph of words, and she wouldn't be reading them, but she could then go, well, that's, 20 seconds, that's 10 seconds, that's 30 seconds. And the stories of in the moment where, she didn't actually know what the story would be until it was put in front of her and she was live and she had to do it in the moment, was phenomenal. And the learning that leaders and could get in that space in terms of their meetings and their communication style and that ability, it blew me away. I really want that ability in my life, to be able to do that and structure it well. We'd be good on our podcast as well. We probably always finish on time. Could do with that. But also, she was really humble. She came from a professional gymnast background, and that didn't work out. But she also said, that she still feels the pressure. She still feels the pressure, even though she knows the stuff, and she does a huge amount of preparation. So she does talk about that. And she practices and puts a lot into that. She still feels that pressure, but believes in herself and just knows the right format to communicate. And she's still in her 20s. She's doing absolutely phenomenal. So a real bright spark and a real energy in the room. What did you get from Leisha, Lee?
I thought she was really inspiring. So, BBC as well as Sky News, LBC Radio, so broadcasting to millions of people every single day, but took her opportunity. She talked about taking a chance or a role above where you think, ahead of time ultimately, and that can work out one of two ways, can't it? It can be overwhelming for people and they really struggle, or it can absolutely be the make of it. I think she said she turned down a Premier League role at one point about broadcasting, and then because she didn't feel ready, and that kind of taught her then moving forward in her career to then absolutely sort of go for the opportunities that went for her. The other thing that absolutely resonated with me and challenged me as well, and I've done a lot since with it, is go and get the feedback, not from where it's comfortable sometimes, but actually from where you're going to get spiky feedback or constructive feedback, whatever that phrase is, because use it as data to then progress. And even if you don't, you get to choose what you do with that feedback. If people have been gracious enough to give it you, what do you then go and do about it? The other thing as well is, like, there was clear alignment, professional gymnast, injury, stop that. It was then how she applied herself through, so then to go into the broadcasting, to now be, and she said, well, I've always been entrepreneurial, so what can I do? And really, if you think about the world we live in, how do you use your skill set to transition to different environments? That was the thing, again, that challenged me, that said, like, what would I be doing in 3, 4, 5 years? And not just me, but then bringing that into coaching practice to think, with people if they're been made redundant or if they've decided to leave or they're looking to set up their own business. Like what is it then to get really definitive of what is your skill set, what is your current capability, and where do you want to be in the future? And that
Brilliant.
really came from
I agree, absolutely. I think a grounding in sport really helped with those three things that you've said. Absolutely, that she sought feedback, that she was always thinking about creatively about her gymnastic career, and she was just really inspirational. So yeah, totally loved her as a guest.
So what about our next guest, who I know you know well, Naomi
I
Dane?
do. Naomi just embodies calm and like a safe pair of hands. She's very creative, and she likes to think a bit more about the bigger picture. But well-being has always been at her core. So she's had an incredible career, in HR and change and program management, and taking on some really big projects, and then into leadership development and coaching, and also a lot in the holistic side. So she does a lot outside that as well in terms of well-being, but really embodies well-being as a culture practice. So not a tick in a box, not a list of things that we can offer people. It was like, how can we look after, because that's really important to know, look after people's well-being to improve performance, or to help people to thrive and perform. So it's not just it's a nice thing to do. There is some real research behind what she talks about that says, if we treat people in the right way and we look holistically at all their different needs in terms of well-being, then we can create a much more sustainable workplace and much more sustainable performance. But that is really driven by our leaders. So she talks about that a lot, the impact that leaders have on people's well-being. I think we talk about it in lots of different frames, because we all remember our best leader, somebody who really did take care of us and looked after us in that space, but also inspired us, which is part of the well-being area, and motivated us and saw the best in us. But we also remember those leaders who were the complete opposite to that, and for some have had a massive negative impact on their lives. So as leaders, we take on this role, but it's a huge responsibility and accountability, and we can make and break people in this role. So to have that intention of looking after your people and understanding their needs and well-being is huge. And Naomi brings that about in an abundance, and has some real great tools and methods to help us think about it as a culture change.
Agreed on all that. I guess my challenge and what helped Naomi helped me think further was the system element to that. So how do organizations do that at a systemic level? And I know that's one of the strengths that she has, and it just got me to think about it more and I go back to almost like the CFO kind of comment. How does well-being become a performance imperative for a CEO?
Yeah.
Versus a HR that's supporting the people where that's their agenda. Equally, an ops manager that's all in the here and now. How do we create well-being? It's a sustainable performance that gives performance month after month after month. And what's it take? What are the requirements? What are also the trade-offs? Because there'll be priorities within that as well. So yeah, she had absolutely a whole spectrum of well-being, and she lives and breathes it. I guess it goes back to what we've said about all the leaders that are really good in this space. Actually, know what they're about because of what they do.
Absolutely. I think it all came down. The trend is they actually care. Like, if you actually care about people and what matters to them, then performance happens as part of that, And so I think that systematic is, you hear on the ground, we talk about walk the floor, you hear on the ground people talking about how they're feeling, or, they're off work or off sick, or there's a lot of stress, or there's lots of, often then if you plug that back, you could then predict the culture and predict the performance. So it's kind of joining all the dots, because all the answers are actually there. You can see it on, see it when you walk the floor, but she has a way of out of connecting those dots. So that was absolutely fantastic. So we're nearly at the end of the series. Three more exciting guests that we had. I can't count, Lee. That's what it is. So our next guest was linked with business and sport again. So we've had quite a lot of people in that space that are linked with that. He had played rugby back in the past, but his main part of his role was he ended up being CEO of a number of organisations, and the last one being the Principality Building Society. But he had decided to take on the Welsh Rugby Union after the Six Nations and felt that they weren't performing. And he rooted that in leadership. So that was kind of the initial part. But actually, when he came onto the podcast, he talked a lot about himself as a leader and that he'd had to look in the mirror. And he'd been through, in later part of his career, he benefited from some coaching, and he saw some things that made him reflect back and go, maybe I wasn't a leader who cared enough about their people. Maybe I could have done things differently. And he was a very successful leader. But he said, the big push was to be able to look in the mirror and then to do something about it, and actually he's grown because he had to stay in a place of discomfort for a little while. So it was a very vulnerable conversation, for somebody who had been very senior in the business world. And he's using some of that to try and influence the leaders in sport. So very inspiring again, and really enjoyed that conversation from a fellow Welsh person as well. Definitely. What about you, Lee?
Yeah, so for Rob Regan, you know what? It was the personal conversation about when he was looking in the mirror about being a dad.
Yeah.
And how he wished he would have been different, or how his kids would have experienced him as he was going through some of the leadership and some of the things. It was like the trade-off, I guess, that Ed was kind of talking about in his world. But I really felt that from Rob. He talked about like being a different father and approaching things differently, and that really struck a chord, because like that takes a lot of gumption, a lot of self-worth, a lot of self-digging, analysis, and then to come out the other side and say, actually, I would have changed X, Y, Z. And I thought, like you say, and the bit I struggle with a little bit is the challenge, is the conflict at times. So to take on I put myself going, could I take on a sports body? Like, there's not a chance. I know I'm not that guy, but he absolutely, backed himself, as you're saying, because he was versed in what he was speaking about. He had an opinion. Not everyone will agree with him, and he was liaising with multiple stakeholders. Now, whether he's successful or not, he had a really clear path and plan around the approach that he was going to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And fundamentally, he was tackling culture, which is a bit like turning the ship around. But he felt like, he was ready to take that on, and he wasn't afraid to share his opinion, but also very open to hear from other people as well. And I really take what you say about being a dad. I hope that calls to others. I see a lot of men in particular in the coaching space that have put everything into their work, and to be as successful as possible, maybe to provide for their families, and then later on go, oh, I really wish I'd have seen things differently. So, hopefully that calls to every one of us to kind of look at our priorities and go, am I doing what's right for me and my future self? What are they going to think about me in 5-10 years time? So it was a really good reflective conversation as well. So I love that. And I suppose transformation was the topic for our next guest. So Joe Carlin came in full of energy, but really grounded and human. So again, as all our guests, I think this is a really common theme: very, very authentic, very human, very honest, and has taken people through the biggest of transformations in change. So she likes to take on the big, chunky, big, ugly challenges, shall we say. But she really cares about how does she get people through that. So gave us some real insight about how people react or respond during change, and what sort of things as leaders we could be thinking about to help people through change, particularly when it's very uncertain? How do you help people in that uncertain environment and climate to have trust in you as a leader, and to take them through on that journey? So absolutely. And when we talk about changes everywhere at the moment, it's a really, really big topic, and leaders are absolutely key to that. She brought out the trust element, and how do you create some of that trust when we're in an uncertain environment, and how do we stay human when actually a lot of the decisions that we have to make might feel very challenging, or it could be we might see people in a place that are upset, or don't like those changes. So how do we help and do that as a leader, and how do we reconcile some of that ourselves? And she came up with that great metaphor around being a boat in the ocean, a raft in the ocean. So a really good listen. What about you, Lee? What did you take from Jo?
I came away from the podcast and I was like, I could work for that lady. Like, she was human, she had energy. She also said that she would, she's quite demanding of her team. This wasn't it can be a challenging time and topic when you transform in organizations, but it was very much grounded in trust. And I think that's where the alignment I had with her. But I don't know, she just inspired me. I was like, I would absolutely go and follow this individual and feel that her messaging, that her warmth, that her trust, that her direction, but also the space to really connect, you would follow it, right? And you can tell that she's really experienced and well versed. And I love the fact that it wasn't just about a spreadsheet or a process that she talked about. And I've seen both sides of it. Very much so. Often process driven change and transformation, as opposed to human change and transformation. And I loved her approach. And what really struck me is Ella said, "Oh, was that the lovely lady before us that went on?" And talked about it in the car this morning, and like, she remembered how she made her feel, and that's the big takeaway for me.
Yeah, definitely. And you would totally follow it. I feel exactly the same way. You feel like you're in really good hands, and kind hands, and human hands. And yeah. And also that sometimes we're working it out and we don't know the answers, but I'm going to work it out with you, and we're going to work this out together. So yeah. And and that's how transformation should be. There's so much of that going on. We need more Jo Carlins in the world, don't we? So.
And that was the challenge. It's like, how do we create that in a world that is changing rapidly? How do we do it in a more human way? That was the big challenge. And I've lots of experience in this space. There's lots of lessons to learn from Jo's episode.
Yeah, loads. They're all very relevant, all from amazing leaders. So finally, episode counting, episode 10, bonus aside, here we are. And we had Pete Ackerley, which again is a business and sports world. But he talked hugely about culture, and people were a huge frame that he saw things through. He really talked about belonging, that really important. How do you create some of that high performance culture? Well, people need to feel like they belong to something. And I think he'd taken a lot of that from the sports world as well as his business world. He had a real ethos that you have to leave people better than you find them, so that was a really important part of his messaging, absolutely. And linked to the change and transformation, success is nothing unless we bring our people with us on the journey, and that they feel part of it and that they enjoy. He really was up for making sure that you enjoy your work and you were inspired and motivated by your work. And he had a wonderful suntan from, I think it's the Yorkshire Dales. I'm rubbish at your geography. It was Yorkshire, wasn't it, Lee?
I believe so. but
phenomenal.
For me, Pete, again, similar to Jo, actually, he had an aura about him that was so quiet and assuming and assured. Like, people, he just had a presence for me. And I don't know whether it's because, I very much like cricket. I love it. And he's been in that world. But it was like, it was really apparent on his vision as well. Like, what are we going after? And if you get that bit right, and he talks about like fundamentals being in place. And for me, the challenge was like, how do you consistently go through the basics, the vision, the taking people along with you, building the right culture, and shutting out the noise?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the challenge. Definitely. And I know at times I can get distracted with things. It's like, go back to, like, if I listened to that episode, I'd be going, right, what is the blueprint? And if I follow this blueprint, I'd be doing pretty well. Like, and he talks about, know your numbers. I know in my own world, I need to know my numbers better. It's a challenge. Know your numbers. What's coming in? What's the pipeline? But it's all the fundamentals that actually they are super important. And when you listen to the best leaders, it's just ingrained. I go back to John Dutton when he was talking about social impact, but he also talked about commercial impact and underpinning.
Yeah, totally.
We've heard that on this podcast multiple times. Like, what are the measures of this organization that say we're being successful, or that we're improving, or that we're in a downturn, and therefore what do we do about it? So being really driven, data driven, and having that as your bedrock has definitely been the personal challenge back and listening to Pete.
Love, absolutely. We talk a lot about the people side, but we cannot forget the commercial side. And what he's really talking about, know your business, know how a business operates. How does your business operate? Actually, Joe talked about that as well. Knowing the fundamentals around how do we make money, how do we do what we do is really important, and can't be taken for granted. So yeah, that was, he was a real inspiration again. So we've had some amazing guests. What a wonderful series. They've all been wonderful series, and series 4 has been absolutely inspirational. Lots of energy in there. And then we decided we were going to do a bonus episode, because we talk about our amazing kids and we love our kids. So we thought we'd bring them in.
Something to do in the holidays.
Something to do with the holidays, yeah. Babysitting day as well. And I think they gave us a few home truths, definitely, that they noticed that everything, like, some of the things that they said about us, you go, oh, and what we are known for as parents. They do know what leadership is about. They came up with some really great examples, of what a leader means or what they think it means. And actually, sometimes the best questions come from the kids, don't they? So it was a funny, on your seat kind of episode. And I love seeing them both in action as well. They were very natural together, Ella and Freddie, and they took over very well. So I do think we should be worried.
Is there a need for Lee and Lisa anymore?
I don't think so. Well, maybe we could have some days. We should have some days off. Get the kids doing.
They're the future, as Whitney Houston once said.
They're the future. So it's a good listen. It's a good little listen. So I was really pleased actually that we got to do that, and we took them out for lunch. So yeah, it was really good. So it was a great way to round up, I think.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't underestimate what it would take for a kid to go into a podcast studio to go and do that. But actually, what really resonated with me is they both completely embraced it. There was no questions or the anxieties or I need prep. It was literally, oh, this is great. It's a wonderful opportunity. That was actually my takeaway from it. And then how many leaders out there have learned leadership lessons from their kids?
Yeah, so many.
If you've got one, I would love you to write it on the post, because I'm sure there's thousands. I'd love to hear what one takeaway you've got. In fact, let me ask you, what one leadership lesson have you taken away from Freddie?
Wow, my God. Well, I guess I'm just on that last bit. I've been thinking about that, that ability to just embrace opportunities and just suck it up and do it. And I often think, when do we lose that? When does the doubt kick in and we go, oh, I'm not sure I'm going to do that, And how many things do we say no to or don't have because we lack some of that confidence, and we're worried about what people might say or rejection or feedback, and they're they're not into that space. And so that is it. It really, I sat and looked at them both, and we do this all the time, but they added just a different, refreshing way of looking at it, and it made me go, when did I lose that, or did I ever have that? Where was that? That amazing confidence. I told you I'm going to sniff it up. But I learned so many lessons from him as a mum all the time in terms of leader. It is my biggest leadership role, our biggest leadership role, and constantly learning and challenging my thinking. What about you?
I may have said this on the pod before, I can't remember, but I always go back to the time when Ella was 5 and I was worried about doing a presentation to the exec board, and she sat on my knee and she sensed that I was worried. So she came over proactively and sat on my knee and she went, "What's up, Dad?" And I explained what I was doing, and she went, "It's all right, Dad, because they all wee and they all poo. You'll be okay." And the lesson there was, and it's what we've said all the way through this, and Ed Clancy again sort of references, is we're all people and we're all human beings, and we've got different skill sets at different levels or different pressures, but actually there's a human element to everything we do. So if you have human-centered leadership and human-centered leadership support to enable the very best leaders to go and lead your people, for me, that's the way to go. That's my MO, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm right or I'm wrong. Clearly you need metrics and you need systems, but I'm fundamentally in the belief that leadership has shifted to how do we get the very best out of humans as well as technology that serve organizations and people combined to get the very best outcomes.
Absolutely. And maybe be more kids.
Be more kids. We've talked about this as the messy class and having fun. We've absolutely done that.
So love that. I've loved that. Well, what a great series. It's amazing to review it, but also to work with you on this podcast. We continue to smile together. You continue to make me smile, and now you are. We should interview you now, because you've done 1,000 miles on your bike, and there's lots of stories I'm sure that you could share about that. So maybe we'll have that as a bonus episode next time, because I think you've got lots to share in that space. But love doing this with you, and a shout out to Megan as well, who does all our producing and our editing. She's brilliant. And also a big shout out to Co-Creation for sponsoring this. We couldn't do this without you, and make all the Media City and editing and all the stuff happen. So we love being part of that, our organisation too. So absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Lee.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you. It's absolute. We've been through a whole load of ups and downs with this, and let's be honest, we've questioned it at times and whatever. Yeah, we've looked at numbers and metrics, but fundamentally, we do this podcast to support leaders get something from it, so that when they go and apply it to their world in their day, it challenges their thinking in some way, or they can hear something that they needed to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. And we'll be doing some more stuff with it, aren't we, next time? So, organisations are starting to use it as resources, and we're going to do some stuff with that as well. So help and support even more, we hope. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening and being part of our podcast. Subscribe. I'm saying it now.
Follow, subscribe. Love it.
I will.
Get involved.
Catch up with you all soon.